Welcome to episode 9 of DX Talks. My name is Russell, and today we're talking with Colin Priest, who is the VP of AI Strategy for DataRobot. And Colin is another evangelist and innovator for intelligent automation, which is going to be the topic of our discussion today. So Colin, welcome.
Thank you.
Do you want to maybe kick off with a bit of an introduction about yourself and what you do with DataRobot?
I'm originally from Australia. I live up in Singapore. I worked much of my career as an actuary, so I had a background in data-based decision-making, but also on the business side. I've been with DataRobot for almost 5 years now, and that's on both the technical and on the people side. And my main role is working with senior business executives, helping them understand how technology can help them and how they should be the ones driving those projects.
It's an interesting point. Actually, and I wasn't planning to, but we'll start there. So one of the common questions I think out there in the market is, if you look at automation, whether it's intelligent automation or otherwise, is automation a technology project or a business project?
It's a bit of both, I have to say. That the secret to success is to get both of those groups working together rather than apart. You need the technology people to hold it together for it to be robust. But unless you've got the business people involved, you're probably solving the wrong problem. How are you going to build something that treats customers in the right way or that is consistent with your business processes and goals if your business people aren't involved?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other side of that for us, which we align perfectly to that definition there, but is that it's the business people that own the business outcomes. It's the business people that are responsible for the KPIs or the outputs or the processes. And so I certainly believe that the business has to have a high level of ownership in that area, perhaps more than is perceived sometimes. But the key point which you made is both technology and the business have to work together. Have you seen any great examples of how businesses achieve that? Because I think that is one of the stumbling blocks businesses have.
There are different business models out there, and it depends partly on how big you are. When you're small, it just happens informally. Yeah. But once you get bigger, you're going to have to start putting together project teams with specific roles. You're going to need an executive sponsor, you're going to need a business subject matter expert, and you're going to need a technical person at the bare minimum. And maybe there's teams within that. But you need people that specialize in their roles, but are still capable of communicating and cooperating with the others and are focused on the outcome. And that outcome, as you say, needs to be a business outcome, not a technological outcome. You don't build these things for the sake of having them. You build them to meet a business goal.
Yeah, I think the other piece I'd add to that, and completely agree, is the importance of governance over the top of that, and I would say the representation of both the business and of technology at that governance level. That's really one of the key things for us.
Yeah, pretty much every major fail in these types of projects that I've seen was because the business people weren't involved enough and because of a lack of AI governance.
Yeah, absolutely. And AI governance, I think that's a completely, actually we'll come back to that later. I think that's a really good one. So if we start coming down to intelligent automation, how do you define intelligent automation and what drew you to the potential of it?
For me, intelligent automation is when your system is able to start doing things that historically would have required human decision making. So it moves beyond well-defined rules into more complex decision making or decisions based on less structured data. How I got into it, obviously, I'm from an artificial intelligence background, and the gap for us is trying to get it to work with people's systems. And so I started talking to robotic process automation experts, and their gap was that they could only do things that were rules-based. And I looked and thought, we really should get these together because they solve each other's problems. And if you look at the business people, they want to get things automated, but they want to do it in an easy way and for as many things as possible and free up the human staff to do what humans really need to do, which is common sense, general knowledge, ethics, empathy, those types of things that you could never automate away.
Yeah, I think the other side of it as well is there's massive skills shortages out there. So
Mm.
businesses are looking for ways to scale without a dependency to increase a workforce that necessarily can't be increased at the moment. We have to be able to decouple headcount from growth to meet the growth agenda of the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 years, because the skills are not available in the areas required for businesses to do so.
The other thing here in 2020 that made it quite urgent is the social distancing changes that we're seeing at
Yeah,
the moment. You really can't have people meeting people close up on many things. You want to try and minimize that. It is related to scale. The things that solve social distancing also solve scale. But to do this, many businesses discovered that they were only able to automate the trivial, like the equivalent of banks only having ATMs, without anything more complex than that. And that severely limited their business to service customers from a distance and at scale. They needed automation that could do a wider range of use cases and solutions, particularly with dealing directly with humans, because humans are complex.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, are you one of the trends we're seeing over here at the moment is people starting to repatriate um, processes that have been outsourced to overseas, um, either overseas call centers or overseas outsourcing models. And one of the reasons for that was the interruption to business continuity during COVID. Are you seeing that a little bit more globally, or is that something that's a bit more specific to New Zealand?
It's not just New Zealand. Your nearest neighbours, Australia, are
Yeah,
very much doing the same thing. And there'd been a little bit of a trend in the past few years for that to happen anyway. People like talking to someone from the same culture from them, with the same accent. Um, they just feel more comfortable. And then there was also the issue of governance. It's very difficult to have governance over a process you don't own, you don't control, and is nowhere near you. And when you're talking about stuff that deals with customers, it is vital that you deal with your customers in the way you want to, not the way someone else wants to. So yeah, certainly in Australia, not so much up here in Asia, but we are seeing it also in Europe and in North America.
I think the other piece which you started to allude to there is data sovereignty and privacy, right? Like
Mm.
if you the second you start using outsourced models that are based in other countries, you have to have a whole different layer of governance around data and privacy, which is I think something that the public is becoming much more sensitive to in the current environment.
Yeah, and it's made more difficult by the increased expectations of your customers for you to deal with them as individuals. And to deal with them as an individual, you must have personal information about them. You can take that one step further with intelligent automation by having predictive uh, things on your customer dashboard. Now, how likely is it they're going to churn? What product are they likely to purchase next? What's their lifetime customer value? What's their likely net promoter score? All those things require a huge amount of personal information. And the moment you start moving that across borders, you're getting into something that is non-trivial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an interesting point there as well. It's not just having customer information. So I do think businesses have it, that they certainly could have more, but it's the ability to apply it. And I think that's one of the big places businesses have a gap at the moment. I think businesses in general have more information, more data than they realize, but they don't know how to start applying it.
Yeah. And everyone's customers are different, everyone's processes are different. So that
Yeah.
makes it even harder for people to start out. They can't just buy an off the shelf package that just solves their problems. It will just solve an off the shelf problem.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the points of this little section here is that the customer experience is now a strategic competitive advantage, and it is going to become one of the biggest battlegrounds for businesses. And I think an interesting point is that the experience businesses offer customers is now not going to be measured against what competitors are doing. It's necessarily going to be measured against best in class, whether that's from a completely different sector or even a different country, if people are getting an exponentially better experience that they're not getting from your business, all of a sudden that's going to start decreasing their satisfaction because they know what's relatively available.
Yeah, and you just can't get away with just treating people as part of big groups that are all the same anymore. Last year, I had a week where Facebook kept trying to sell me shampoo. Every time I would block saying it's irrelevant. And you know what Facebook would do in return? Advertise a different brand of shampoo.
That's awesome.
Just missing the point. This is why we need our automation to be more intelligent. I finally managed to block all of those. They ran out of brands. So they started trying to sell me hair extensions. And we just went on like that. And it means that more and more, it's not just now that I ignore ads, I actively dislike them because they've got it so wrong. Whereas you contrast that with Amazon, and I've been a customer of Amazon for more than 20 years. I hop on trying to buy one thing, and I end up buying 5 because they just know me. They know what I like. They know what not to show me. They're not going to try and sell me a hairbrush. They are going to sell me things that I hadn't realized that existed, but they know I like. And that's a great experience. That's why I keep buying more and more from them and why Jeff Bezos is so damn rich.
Here's an interesting topic there, a use case then, which I think plays into this. And I saw a presentation last year overseas, and they were talking about, I can't quite remember who the speaker was or where the topic came from, but the use case related to Amazon. And where they're at now is Amazon is recommending products to you, but if we take that another step further, based on your history, based on the data that they have available about you, they're going to be able to predict the products that you're going to want. And so instead of recommending it to you, it's going to get to the point where they simply put it in a box and send it to you, and necessarily say to you, look, if you like this, we'll charge your credit card in 30 days time. If you don't, send it back. Do you sort of see necessarily e-commerce getting to that point?
It will be for certain types of transactions. We're more talking about the types of grocery sort of things. It's repetitive sort of purchases that work for that. Where it won't work so well is, for instance, my wife's passion, which is fashion. She's a fashion designer. It's really, really difficult to predict what someone is going to like next based upon their past purchases, because their past purchases are seasonal. The fashions keep changing. It's not going to work well. My wife buys me clothes preemptively, and a great deal of the time that doesn't work as well. And she's an expert. But it would be great for these other things, these mundane things that just you don't think of as important until you don't have them.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So here's I guess if we sort of follow on, and this is a nice segue, the technology sector has a habit of overhyping the potential for technology in the short term and underestimating the potential benefit in the long term. And my personal view is, the term intelligent automation has been around for 3 to 5 years, but necessarily 3 years ago there was, in my view, more hype than there was practical reality. But 3 years is certainly a long time, and I know I hold the view that there is a very strong degree of practical reality now. So I'm curious on your views of what you believe is practically possible for businesses now.
It's certainly much more practically possible than it was even 2 years ago. But as you say, you've got to beware the hype. I read lots of science fiction, and I love my science fiction movies. What we're talking about now is nothing like that. What we are talking about is narrow intelligence. You can train a system to make a limited set of decisions in narrow circumstances. And if you have the right data and the outcome is predictable, you can do that quite well. But don't expect it to know anything other than that. I once got a question in a seminar, when are we going to have to start negotiating with our systems about whether they're going to do this for us? And I'm going, never. The computer systems, it's no more than you negotiate with your computer to show you an internet page. No, you tell it to and it shows it to you. So we just have to think of it as more of a bunch of small steps that started to make it more practical. It won't solve all your problems, but it will start to solve a wider and wider range of use cases. And you need to define them in narrow steps for that to work, though. That's one of the things. Don't expect a single system to solve all of your problems at once.
What do you see as the rate of adoption for IA?
I think it's still at the early stages, primarily because I think most people haven't realized it's even available or practical, as you were saying. People have been looking at this sort of thing for years, and when they get into the details, discovered it was hype. But we are increasingly seeing it with the larger enterprises, the banks of the world, for example, the marketing teams of big organizations, where there's a lot of stuff that is fairly well defined, but was too complex to code before. There's stuff where they want to deal with customers at scale, and they don't want to build enterprise software. They want to be a lot more nimble and agile in the way they do that. We're seeing that sort of thing. Another one is the backroom stuff. So we're seeing that in medical care, for example, in the support roles, so that you can free up your human healthcare staff to deal with people, which is where you really want them to be. And in triaging alerts and messages, where the problem with the modern world is too much information, too many alerts, too many messages. And what you want is something that's more intelligent, that can read and understand text, filter out what you don't need to see, bring to priority what is really urgent to see, or get it to the right person instead of to a broad team.
I think one of my perspectives and one of the key messages I've always pushed is that number one, intelligent automation is a capability, not a solution. And number two, that capability is made possible through the use of multiple technologies in combination. And one of the views that I have is, a lot of businesses necessarily have some of these technologies that are required in their businesses, but it's a question, number one, of getting that technology to work at scale by itself, let alone getting it to work at scale in combination with other technologies to deliver that outcome. And I think that's, for me, I think that's one of the big challenges people have is how do we actually get these to work together as a capability? Building a single solution is not actually that hard, right? It's getting them to work as a capability at within a scalable framework. That I think that's one of the big challenges for businesses.
Yeah, too often people just want to jump to the exciting part, which is having a robot doing things. And they forget that the only way that will ever work is to change business processes, to connect things together. And so they buy one thing thinking it's the solution, and then realize it won't connect things through, or it doesn't work with their business process. We need a lot more of thinking through at a holistic level what things should look like, what business flow should look like, what stakeholders will see, the frictions in their experience, whether you're going to increase or reduce those frictions, and plan that way. The worst I've ever seen was an AI that was brilliant at picking customers to sell a product to, but they didn't think through the implementation. So they quite literally would print out reams and reams of printouts of the predictions and send them to salespeople who promptly ignored them.
Yeah.
Too hard.
Absolutely. I think it's, you sort of touched on change, right? And it's having a very clear vision for what you want to deliver and what you want to achieve, but it's also then understanding people, processes, technology, and governance, and the interrelated dependencies between those pillars, if you will. Because failure to do so, and you're probably not going to achieve a tangible outcome that's sustainable within a business. With the big banks, which you mentioned, the big businesses of the world, those are the kind of businesses who I perceive to have a team of data scientists squirreling away up in a floor somewhere, a big team of engineers and various other technical professionals. I've got the view that we've also reached a point where those resource requirements are no longer barriers to embarking on IA. Do you share that view?
I do. The initial situation describing these huge teams, they're firstly only even practical for large organizations like big banks or like the big tech firms. But the other is that they're doing things the old-fashioned way. It's like the earliest part of the 20th century when every car was built manually as a craftsman car. And along came Henry Ford and said, well, this is only working for the ultra wealthy who are patient enough to wait for a car to be built for them, and found a way to production line this. Now, it didn't result in fewer people being employed. It actually resulted in more because it made the technology available to more people. The same thing's now starting to happen with artificial intelligence. We are creating tools that make it a lot easier to production line the construction of new systems, of new machine learning algorithms, of new artificial intelligences with the standardization that Henry Ford had with his car. So you can trust it works because there are thousands of others. And if there was a serious problem, we would have noticed it by now.
I think that's an awesome analogy.
So we are seeing it filter down into the medium-sized enterprises now. And that's a great thing. I think with the very small enterprises, that's still going to be a challenge in the near future. They often don't have enough data, or the value to them isn't enough to justify the cost. I think the solution for them is going to be more shared artificial intelligence systems, so services that are more generic.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely, in terms of building your own capability, we've found there's definitely a flaw in New Zealand, and it generally links to scale and the value that will be returned to the business, because there does come a point where establishing something is uneconomical. But I do agree with you that the market will continue to evolve with different service models, giving businesses a greater variety as to how they can access capability.
Yeah, so even just the standard RPA value proposition, 20 years ago, if you wanted to connect systems together, that was an enterprise project.
Yeah,
it would take years, literally years. So RPA basically gives you a production line that more normal people can build stuff with and do so quickly. The same thing is happening with artificial intelligence. So you can do things faster with fewer people. And that's a great solution for everyone.
So where are businesses starting? We're seeing greater level of accessibility. Where are the businesses starting that you're seeing?
Most of the initial use cases that I see are customer-facing use cases, primarily from marketing teams. They're already doing data-driven analysis, but they're facing those scalability problems. Doing more campaigns, being more targeted so they don't try and sell me a hairbrush. They need a better way of doing this. And so that's where we tend to get in the door in most places. Now, on the other hand, in manufacturing, that's not really the issue there. They once again have a ton of data, but they usually don't realize they have it along their production line. They've got monitoring all the way along their production line that they aren't using except in gauges on the machines. And humans come along and look at those, and that's not a very efficient thing to do. I've seen a production line that had more than 7,000 measures coming out of it along the production line. And that's just too many for humans to look at. So the value there is then, how can we make sure that this overload of information is getting filtered so that humans see what they need to see? And then the last thing is really just things about risk management. Can I predict what's going to go wrong before it goes wrong, and go and do some maintenance work before it fails? That's things like power lines, about production lines again, anything like that, and healthcare, where you want to predict whether someone's going to get a sepsis infection in a hospital before it gets serious. They're the types of things you need to be asking. Is there a customer experience I can improve? Is there something that goes wrong that I could flag before it goes wrong? Or is there an overload of info and I want it triaged to me that I only get to see what I really need to see?
I think there's some great examples in there, and it reminded me of two use cases I've seen. One was from the States, from a cable company who were using a machine learning backbone and predictive analytics to identify when a customer was likely to experience a fault and what that fault was. And what
Mm.
they were able to do from there is reach out to the customer in advance and go, "Hey, we're worried this might be about to happen. If it does, try these three things, and if you've still got some problems, give us a call." And the impact to them, I don't remember the exact number, but it had a material impact on their customer satisfaction. They were solving a customer's problem before the customer even knew that they had it.
Yeah.
There's another one in New Zealand, and this is a New Zealand use case. Again, it was with image recognition and machine learning, and our power network. There's thousands of kilometres of power lines going up and down the country, and so inspecting those used to be a visual exercise, and the rate of error, I don't know what it was, but it wasn't perfect. And so now, instead of visual inspections, they're simply flying a helicopter past, capturing the images at a rapid rate, and then using machine learning to screen the images and identify which sections of the line require maintenance with around about 97% accuracy. So they've exponentially removed the constraints, number one, of human error, and number two, of human capacity, right? A human can look at so many photos an hour. And I think those are both really awesome examples of what's being done in the world at the moment.
Yeah, another cool one related to that I saw, it was a friend of mine, he works for another company, and they were looking at Japan, where they have hurricane risk. And they had satellite images of buildings. And so they were using it to look at the roofs of the buildings to see if the roofs were in disrepair and would fall apart if the winds were high. So that was another great one that you could then, well before a hurricane arrives, notify people you need to do some maintenance on your roof or you're going to be in trouble when the wind comes.
That's
and
really awesome.
Talking about contacting customers preemptively, a slightly softer version of that is trying to figure out why a customer is now phoning you up. So what I hate is when something goes wrong, either an ATM gobbled my card or my mobile phone is refusing to do roaming, and I have to phone up because they don't preemptively contact me, and I get that, press 1 to change your password, press 2 to purchase this, and there's this long list, none of which is get through to a human because something's broken. It's what I really want is, hi Colin, are you calling about the fact your card was just gobbled? Let me put you through to someone if that's the case. It's very different customer experience. So too much automation is about trying to remove humans from it. What we should be doing is making it intelligent enough to know when the customer needs a human and when they just need an automated solution.
Yeah, I agree. And actually that's, we sort of said at the start of this year, we believed that one of the biggest trends would be that we would see a greater level of augmentation between technology and humans. And I've made the point as well in IA, which directly reflects what you've said, is it's not about removing the humans, it's about understanding where it's best to lead with technology and where it's best to lead with humans. But the critical piece in that is understanding how to hand off between the two, right? Because it's no longer, it's not one or the other. It's not now you're in a technology channel or a people channel. It's knowing when to transition a custom from a technology-led interaction to a person-led interaction, and how that handoff is happening seamlessly, because you can't lump it across to the human and then have the human go, so what are we talking to you about today, sir? That doesn't work, right?
Yeah, and we're starting to see that happening with the customer service chatbots. They'll handle the mainstream stuff, but if you make them intelligent, they'll realize when either the problem is beyond the rules-based solutions they've got, or the customer is incredibly upset and needs a bit of empathy from a human. And then it will get triaged through to a human in a seamless way so that the human staff member starts chatting to them without the customer realizing it's been a switch, but the human staff member knows why it was just triaged to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've got the context. It's not starting again. They pick it up and they carry it on.
Yeah.
It's great. What do you reckon is stopping businesses or holding businesses up? Because I agree with you that in terms of IA, we're at the very, it's the innovators of the world out there that are driving this capability at the moment. So I think the opportunity is immense, but what do you think is stopping businesses adopting it faster?
I think there's two big problems. One is that people don't know enough. So they don't want to go forward when they don't understand something. The other is that too often it becomes a technology project. It's not driven by ROI. You need to drive things according to business ROI and not technology for its own sake. So the solution to both of these is to educate business people to understand the technology, understand what it can be used for and what can go wrong, and how to estimate ROI on new projects so that they can find some that are very likely to work, that are likely to pay off and quickly, and they can get going with that. And so, because otherwise it's just too big a choice, it's too confusing, it's too risky.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way of putting it. So obviously, if we're looking at your screen now, there's a nice DataRobot label in the corner, and we did mention you're from DataRobot. We've seen the emergence of a niche category under machine learning called AutoML, and DataRobot is credited with the creation of that category, and it's also recognized as a market leader in that space. So do you want to give us a bit of an overview on what DataRobot does, what the journey's been, and where your focus is?
Sure. So machine learning is the backbone of most modern artificial intelligence. It's when a computer system learns by example instead of being given rules to follow. So you don't need to know that jargon, but just a bit of background there. So most modern artificial intelligence is powered by this because it's easier and it's more agile to do it this way. What we did is we looked and we were looking at the way that everything had to get built manually, and our two founders were doing this every day. And they realized a great deal of what they were doing manually was repetitive and time consuming and relatively well defined. And as technology people, they realized anything that ticks all those is a prime candidate to be automated. So effectively what we invented was a production line for machine learning models. So you don't sit there manually crafting a new predictive model to power your artificial intelligence. So the first stages were just purely doing that, bringing in the knowledge of the world's top data scientists. They hired some data science competition winners to bring in more knowledge. Where we've progressed to from there is we've now started to build in safety guardrails so that you don't do something silly. And as someone who's been building these things for 20 years, I still do stupid stuff. Every human has a bad day or a bad moment where we make a silly mistake. What again goes further than that, and has been very topical in the last couple of years, is that some of those mistakes have ethical implications. Are you treating some people worse than others in an unfair way? So that we started bringing in ways of making the decision-making more transparent to a normal human. You should not need to be a PhD to have a rough intuitive idea of how that AI is working and what it's likely to do next.
Cool.
So we need a certain level of transparency so that you do not need to be a PhD to have any idea about what's going on. We need the business people to be involved in the governance of artificial intelligence systems the same way they manage their human staff. Related to that, we discovered that the deployment and management of models in production was also being done in a very manual and haphazard way. So there is a new field called MLOps, where you monitor the health of your systems that are in production. Just like your human staff need KPIs that they're measured against and occasionally need retraining, your AI systems need the same level of governance. So we've automated a great deal of that. We can give preemptive warnings to IT and business people depending on different triggers for when there's something unusual going on there. And finally, we looked at the way data is being collected and put into these systems, whether to train it or to run it. And we realized that there were two problems there. One is that it was very manual and time consuming. The other is that it was actually quite error prone. So we looked at automating as much of that, in particular to get that broad set of data down to a more manageable set that a human can get their head around. So our goal in the end is trusted AI, where your AI shares your values, that it works in an intuitive way that a normal person can understand, and finally, that it just works as planned. It's not built in a garage using cheap parts.
I think the other exciting part about what you guys are doing is you're democratizing data science, and you're making data science capability available to people in the business who understand the business processes, who understand the data, and necessarily at a high level understand what machine learning is and how it works, and you're extending that capability, basically extending that capability into businesses, making it more accessible for businesses.
Yeah, the analogy I give is that when I started my career, which is more than 30 years ago now, I'm really a bit embarrassed, there was no such thing as a spreadsheet. And I remember when the first spreadsheet came out, it was Lotus 123, which I'm not even sure exists anymore. But that was just like a revelation. And we were using calculators before then. But everyone was scared of it. And so only the most technical people were allowed to use a spreadsheet. And yet now it is so common that everyone has one on their computer at work. I have one on my phone. That's what we're trying to do with artificial intelligence. It shouldn't just be your really technical people and scary. Normal business people, normal humans should be able to do things, maybe not the really complex stuff, but at least some mainstream stuff here.
I think the way I've started to look at it is technologies like DataRobot don't necessarily mitigate the need to have access to highly specialized people or highly technical people. You've highlighted some really important risks, which I want to loop back to in a second. So you still need access to those skills, but what it's doing is making it possible for a far greater level of people within a business to play a hands-on role, to contribute and to use these technologies, which I think is really the powerful opportunity.
Yeah, and with those really technical people, they're expensive and rare. What you want to do is get the most value out of them as you can. You do not want them sitting there for months manually writing a script. Free them up for the stuff that you really need their skills for.
Which actually is a nice segue. You've mentioned before ethical implications, you've mentioned fairness, you've mentioned transparency, and you've also talked about the need for governance systems in IA. Now, this is a passion point for me, talking about AI governance, and I am told that this is a favourite subject for you too. So do you want to share some of your views on governance in AI?
Sure. The number one principle is humans are responsible for what an intelligent automation system does. Do not think of these systems as fully autonomous, like one of these humanoid robots in science fiction. So step one, get humans to own the results, and you get the right ones for that. The next is take away as many sources of error as possible. And they're generally the manual processes, the manual decision making. There's just some basic engineering there. And then finally, rather than making passive monitoring of a system, make it proactive. Set up alerts so that it alerts you when it is unsure about what's going on, what we call humble AI, where it's not so arrogant it thinks it knows the solution to everything. Design your systems that they get humans involved when things look weird, or a customer needs a human, or when things are just outside of their experience.
To give this some context, like I want to make sure people understand the importance and the severity of what we're talking about. Is there an example you'd share where you feel?
I'll bring us back to coronavirus and keep it topical. If you're managing a supply chain in this year, there is no way the artificial intelligence system that you trained last year is doing a good job, because the world changed so much. If you're, in particular, a toilet paper supply chain manager, you've probably noticed this already. But I'm seeing businesses that just decide to ignore what's going on and just keep the system running. I've seen a bank that
Actually
isn't
did.
changing any of its credit analysis because, yes, things have changed, but people will excuse them because of that. And that's just horrible, horrible governance. It's going to come out badly for both the bank and the customers. The bank's going to get losses that it could have mitigated by taking preventive action. The customers are going to get stressed out and possibly even bankrupt because they've got loans that continued to go bad without any action happening. What you need are alerts coming out of the system saying, you are making decisions at the moment that I was not trained to make. Please get a human involved. Or there is newer data. Maybe retrain it on the newest data so that it can get back to doing things automated. We can't just treat these things like a science fiction, like R2D2 or C3PO, where you can just give them a vague instruction and off they go. We need proper management, and at the moment we don't even have the same level of management that we have for human staff.
Yeah, I think you had 3 points there. One was get humans to own the results. Humans are responsible. The second was take away sources of error, and the third was proactive monitoring. I'd add a fourth one to that, and the fourth one is to have a safe set of business heuristics that you can apply when you realize something has gone wrong. Because when you realize something is wrong, it's not, especially in the example that you've talked about, or something more serious like deciding or predicting who gets access to a health service. You can't leave that running for 5 more minutes or a day or a week. It has to stop now, and you have to be able to revert instantly, and you have to know how you're going to do that.
Yeah,
that's
what we call humble AI, by the way. We just produce some capabilities where you can define those rules and some of and the action that needs to be taken. So it might be fall back to a simpler decision. It might be an extrapolation under a simpler extrapolation, or it might be throw an error so that no decision gets done, because the worst thing we could do is make a decision in these circumstances. And the final could be get this to a human because we think a human could sort this out.
Yeah.
You've got to plan for things to go wrong.
Absolutely. We've had a really awesome conversation today, but by way of wrapping up, are there three, if someone was to come to you and say, I'm interested in developing IA capability, what are the 3 pieces of advice you would give me, or the biggest piece of advice you would give me? What would you say that is?
So number 1, make sure that what you're doing is business driven, not technology driven. Number 2, make very clear what your expectations are of the business process that you're going to build, and all of the stakeholder analysis that goes around that, including clearly defining what your ethical values are. If you haven't defined them, there's no way your AI system is going to act consistently with them. And finally, put proper governance around this. This needs to be enterprise grade systems that you are building. Things that are just hacked together quickly, manually, do not work.
Awesome. I think that's incredibly sage advice. Colin, look, we've appreciated your views and your insights. They're incredibly valuable. Thank you for your time. And yeah, it's great. Cheers.
Thank you for inviting me.